Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm a social studies educator, historian, and host of this, the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. I'm also an avid collector of popular culture artifacts. I love what I find at thrift store outlets, garage sale leftovers, and what I spot just making my way around the built world. I enjoy sorting through boxes of free books and magazines, not to mention online collections like Internet Archive, and of course the Library of Congress. But you don't need to spend your time digging through bins or following online rabbit holes to get a look into the past. The movies and TV we watch, the books we read, and the games we play are all documents of the past. So is fashion, food, music, toys, even the roads we travel on and the places we live and work in. Everything is a primary source. This podcast is the result of exhibiting these kinds of artifacts in public, getting passersby to select an item they connect with, and then chatting with me to see what it says about the time, place, and people who made it. The conversation you are about to hear, therefore, is your history, my history, our history, through popular culture. I'm here with Melissa, and after perusing my table of all sorts of pop culture debris, you came across a couple that you had to make a decision over. One was a record from 1988, and this is a tape from just a couple years later, a VHS tape of the Sports Illustrated 1992 Year in Sports. And you said you selected this one because of kind of like your non-relationship with sports. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I really don't care about sports. I think professional sports are actually not great for our culture, but I remember vividly 1992 and the Dream Team and the Olympics in basketball, and watching that, and the whole Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman and I'm looking, I'm like, oh, Magic Johnson, and what Magic Johnson represented with his HIV status, Ewing's on here. I don't know the fifth guy, but
Karl Malone.
Oh, Karl Malone. I know the name, and that's 5 more names than I know now. I mean, I probably know a couple basketball players, but it's so interesting what they represented in pop culture when I was 11 years old, and the fact that I watched basketball games, and there's a bonding between my twin brother and I, and I remember vividly watching the Olympics in 1992, and specifically for the basketball. And I don't remember the other. I was looking. I was like, I don't remember the Super Bowl that year. I might remember the halftime show if it was like said who performed. But yeah, this is definitely bringing back memories of the whole culture behind the Dream Team and what it represented. And I think I had. In 1992, I had a starter jacket, Magic Johnson's starter jacket, and that was like a really big deal.
Say no more. I mean, the starter jacket alone was like the most important and recognizable early 90s artifact that you can imagine.
Yeah, I think that was probably the year after, but it was like, had to have a starter jacket. My mom saved up to get me a starter jacket.
Total status symbol. Yeah. And even like the style of starter jacket, it had to be the pullover one.
Yeah, it couldn't be zipped
the
down.
zip up one, no.
Yeah.
It had to have the pullover.
Yeah.
And it was, and so I grew up near on and then afterwards near Air Force bases, and I don't know if you are aware of this, but Air Force and all the military bases have their own stores on them. And just like other outlets, they made some of their products were specific to those stores. So we had a line of sports equipment called Athletic Club that you could only get at the Armed Forces stores. And then they did have some starter stuff, but only the one that just said starter on it. It didn't have the teams. So you could always spot, speaking of status symbols, you could always spot the base kids off base because they'd be wearing the nondescript one. It's interesting that you say that about professional sports, because the Dream Team right there completely, just their existence smashed the amateur sports being elevated by arriving in the Olympics. So the Olympics had long been for, and most of the sports in the Olympics, it still remains true, for amateur athletes, non-professionals, people who, a lot of them, they would tend to pull them from college campuses,
not making $10 million a
right,
year.
making no money out of it. They're just,
Soccer dudes,
to celebrate the love of sports and athletic competition. And so it was a pretty big deal when the Olympic Committee dropped that, and it was kind of controversial. People, I remember, asking, like, is this right that the USA, which has, and definitely in 1992, arguably the greatest, it's our sport. We created basketball.
Yeah.
We have the best basketball players in the world playing here. Is it even ethical that we go, like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
How important is it that we win this gold medal? Culturally speaking and timeline wise, why do you think that happened in 1992? Considering where things were for the United States on the world stage in 1992.
Well, 1992, I mean, this was right after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and then communism and the Soviet Union was breaking up and everything, and we were the superpower. There were no superpowers left except for the United States. We were it, and so we were proving. Yeah. We were the superpower.
Let's keep this thing going.
And I forgot, where were the Olympics that
year?
Barcelona. And so we were the superpower. And I think ethics didn't matter as much. It started to... It was about, now that we're talking about it, it's like, okay, when did it change from the 80s to the 90s? And that was a shift. And you could say because it's post-communism or, I'm using air quotes, but post-Cold War. I don't know, what was that time?
Well, I think you nailed it right there. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's most revealing about that particular, and that dominates the cover of this Sports Illustrated VHS is, the year in sports, they choose two pictures. You think with the year in sports, you'd probably have like a collage similar to what you create of, lots of images, and maybe have, if we're talking about the Olympics, that lends itself to dozens of pictures of different athletes of
and
different
genders.
The winter,
I remember the ice skating that year. And
because that was right around the time that they decided to
split it.
To split it. Like winter would be, because I think
2 years.
They 2 years later they had another winter games, and we got very familiar with the athletes in that, because we saw them more than a few times. And looking back on it, you're right. I think diversification in sports, and then sports crossing in over into popular culture. I remember when the Dream Team was actually playing, when the Olympics were going on, they were borrowing music from Terminator 2, which had come out the year before, to introduce, they, not when they were coming onto that'd be pretty rude if they're like, okay, by the way, you're going to be terminated, but when NBC, which always carried the Olympics, was promoting the Dream Team game, you'd hear that music from Terminator 2, and you see these guys slow motion entering the court. And it's also around that time that the Chicago Bulls were dominating, and they became known, and other teams started doing it afterwards, for having the big entry music. They'd turn off the lights in their arena, and the music would come on, and the big strobe lights going everywhere. And now, and to my knowledge, they didn't do that in NBA basketball or any other sport.
And it was like the athletes are pop stars now, and now that we're talking about, and athletes were celebrities before, but now they were on this pedal. Michael Jordan is like one of the biggest celebrities, one of the biggest athletes ever in history, and it was during this time. And also the idea, Dennis Rodman, who was remember
the Worm,
so cool, and like had green hair,
different
and,
hair,
wrote
game,
tattoos, and but he was like a character and also this celebrity, and it wasn't. He wasn't just playing basketball. Right. It was so much more than that. And that's what we see now, and we just take it for granted that we have
he wouldn't stand out on the court
at all
In the
now with
modern
his
age,
green
yeah.
hair and tattoos. It's like every other player is like that. And I think we also have to say, but as two white people, we're talking about a cover of five men of color and how that's changed and how racial dynamics have changed over time. And in 1992, it wasn't as common to see a magazine cover with five black men on the cover, and how sports have changed the history or changed our culture with that as well. I don't want to go into that much because I don't know that much, but I think that definitely was a way for folks to have black men in our living rooms and have more diversity in our culture than maybe we had before on a very surface level.
Well, and looking at the maker of this, Sports Illustrated, they were part of that, actually. They published on their cover of their magazine, which was a weekly magazine, lots of athletes. They were just illustrating sports, and so as sports was evolving, and I think Sports Illustrated may have started as early as the 60s, I want to say. I know I've seen the entries. I own some Sports Illustrated from the 60s, so I think it was around that time. And sports were part of the civil rights era. Baseball back in the 40s was the first to break the color barrier. I don't know when basketball, must have been much earlier because there have been African-American players in basketball for most of the NBA's existence, I believe. But football was the 60s when segregation was ending. And the AFC had a big role in that. So the arrival of the American Football League, AFL, when it started in 1960, was a much more modern, progressive version of the same exact game. And that eventually produced the Super Bowl, which is also on the cover of this. It's the two things they choose is Dream Team, Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl in that year was between the Washington Redskins of the NFC, which is one of those old-timey teams. I think they're now the Washington Commanders because of the exact thing that you're just talking about.
Yeah, because that's a horrible...
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't create a team like that. In 1932, when they first showed up, it was like,
commonplace, yeah.
But by even as early as the 90s, it was being, as recent as the 90s, it was being very controversial. And they were playing the Buffalo Bills. And that was the second of 4 games that the Bills went to and lost. But I remember watching that game, because my family was a big Washington fan at the time. And, they had a great season. The Super Bowl halftime show that year, going back to that thread of sports turning into pop icons, it was one of the first years that they had an actual, real showcase, kind of what we're familiar with now, with an actual pop singer. I could look it up quickly. I know that
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson was, I think, the following year. So Super Bowl, and because I've done a lesson on this before.
Yeah, who played who was Michael Jackson?
And I'll edit all this out because it was actually...
I'm getting exhausted. Stop in a minute.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Halftime show was called Winter Magic and featured a celebration of the Winter Olympics.
That was the halftime show
That was the
in
halftime
1992?
show. Because, and when you look into it, you can look at a list of all the Super Bowl halftime shows since the game started. Most of them are like marching bands.
Yeah.
I remember one year it was like an Elvis impersonator. Right. It wasn't until right around this time, I think it was the following year, that Michael Jackson ushered in.
And they started having,
actual pop stars showing up for the halftime show. So it's like, this is a remarkable year in sports. They might not have realized it, and that's why this is such a simply, turn it over. There's not a single picture.
No, it's just the
magazine's called Sports Illustrated. There's no illustrations at all.
It's just a list.
It's just, we have the following on this tape. So, this may have stuck out to you because, you kind of subconsciously realize of what a turning point this was in sports history. And as we round out this conversation, I'll point out what I said before we hit record. And that is, this thing is still in its sealed, meaning that it probably didn't mean a lot to the person who got it, probably because, like, oh, you get a subscription, get your free tape. But I love what you're saying about it. I think it's absolutely correct that it tells us that this was a red letter year in bringing diversity, bringing sports and popular culture all into one big package, quite literally. And so I appreciate your insights. And if maybe tomorrow we can do the Fine Young Cannibals conversation. But growing up in that time was a fun experience because we got to see. I still remember. I think it was maybe that year, the following year, we went hunting for the cover. There was a special Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year issue with Michael Jordan on it, and it was a 3-dimensional. It was holograph. We had to go all the way to Montreal to find one because they were all in America, in the United States. They had all been purchased. They're all off the newsstands. We couldn't find a single one. We didn't go to Montreal for that reason, but we just happened to be up in Montreal, and there it was. My brother and I each got an issue, even though we didn't both need it. And that was part of what Sports Illustrated was doing. Even if they weren't intentionally doing it, they were bringing to populations that weren't familiar with having, and that's how sports have long functioned, professional sports. So let's allow you to have the last word, because I feel like I just went on for a while.
No, thank you. This is great, and it's great to put my mind, because I'm really not someone who likes sports at all. It's not an interest of mine, and I think a lot of times it brings out the worst of people, but it also brings out the best in people. And I think in 1992 it did bring out it brought people together to support this team and to support. And I'm definitely not the person who's like, "Yay, America!" But to gather people together. And I remember watching this with my grandparents, and we weren't like a family thing, but it brought people together for a common, to watch this basketball, to watch people.
And almost an extension maybe even of the euphoria that the country was experiencing, that patriotic fervor that was produced during the Gulf War.
Gulf War, yeah.
You compare the two Gulf Wars, the 91 Gulf War with 2003 Gulf War, you have a dramatic public response to it, much differently. Yellow ribbons around trees in 1991. That is a whole different podcast. Yeah, but I mean, it's like, I feel like the Team USA, the Dream Team, was an extension of that.
Yeah, of the...
I can see this logo that they designed. It almost has a quasi-military look to it.
Yeah,
like you could see it on the back of an airplane. And, so... Yeah. We could do this all day. I know you don't have the time.
No.
Is there anything you would like to mention? You mentioned before that you're an artist.
Yeah, so my business, well, I have two businesses, but the one is called Iceberg Consulting, and I work with schools and businesses to dig below the surface, to see the 90% that we don't see below the surface of the iceberg, or
it can be exhausting. It is.
And it's exhausting, and thank you.
But it's a good exhaustion. Yeah. And I think we're on the same exact wavelength. There is so much more that meets the eye, So thank you again, Melissa.
Thank you. Sorry for that.
Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us, and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything is a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.